Well, I didn't actually know that that Ant and Sue were going to lead off in a prayer, because I had a little story to start with in honor of them. So here's the story. An elderly man in Johannesburg, he called his son in London and said, look, I hate to ruin your day, son, but I've got to tell you something. Your mother and I, we're getting a divorce. 45 years of marriage and that much misery, that is enough. The son, Dad, what are you talking about? So the son started yelling. He said, listen, son, we cannot stand the sight of each other any longer. We're sick of each other. I'm sick of talking about it. Call your sister in Dubai and you can tell her. So frantically, the son picks up the phone, says, fine. He calls the sister. And the sister, she explodes on the phone. No. He says, don't do anything. They're not getting divorced. I'm going to sort this out. She picks up the phone, calls her dad. Dad, you are not getting divorced. Do not do a single thing. I'm going to be there on the weekend. I'm going to call my brother back. He's actually going to be there with me. We'll both be there until then. Just do not do a thing. She hangs up the phone. The old man, he puts the phone down and he turns to his wife. Honey, he says, all sorted. They're coming for Christmas and they're paying their own way. It's a good one. Got to love a bit of Bill Johnson. Thank you, Bill. And I'm going to ask V to come up and read a different story for us quickly.
Once there was a father with 2 sons. The youngest asked for his share of the family money early, left home, and spent it all on a good time. When the money ran out, he had no food and ended up feeding pigs to survive. For a Jewish boy, that was about as low as life could get. Hungry and ashamed, he decided to go home. On the way, he practiced what he would say. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I don't deserve to be your son. Please just make me one of your servants. But while he was still far away, his father saw him coming and ran to meet him. Before the son could even finish his speech, his father threw his arms around him, put a robe on his back, a ring on his finger, and threw a huge party to celebrate. The older brother was furious and refused to come inside. This didn't seem to be fair to him at all. But the father came out and said, we had to celebrate. Your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.
Thank you, V. So, when I was preparing for this talk, I started off rather excited, and then I thought, I've got a bit of a problem here. This passage is perhaps the greatest parable that Jesus ever told. And it is perhaps one of the greatest stories ever told, and some would say, probably including me, that arguably it is the greatest story ever told. So, did kind of what any speaker or writer would do, got a nice strong coffee, a blank piece of paper, and I thought, all right, let's get some creative ideas here. What are we going to do? I'm going to ask Tegan to give me a little hand here. It's just behind there. All right, so while Tegan comes, I said, okay, creative juices flowing, option 1, I know what I'm going to do. I'm not going to focus on what's front and center. Not going to focus on front and center. So option 1, we crank it out here. Option 1, the young son. Obvious right there. No, what I'm going to do, I'm going to focus on the older son. The older son. Remember there what V said, the older son, who in an exchange with his father looks at his father and says, I have been slaving for you all my life. Ouch. A son telling his dad, I've been slaving for you all my life. And I thought, that's good. I thought, no, man, some of you have heard that before. Forget the let's see. We can do better. Option two. I know, said, I'm going to lean into the Middle Eastern nature of the story. Newsflash, Jesus was Jewish, lived in the Middle East there, and the cultural setting was key. So that speech from the eldest son, that behavior from the youngest son, shocking, shame, dishonor, disgrace, that hurt is significant. So this is good. And then I thought, hang on a minute, Ian just spoke about this last week. Didn't he do a great job? All right, option 3. Let's see. Where can we go now? Creative, art, an image tells 1,000 words, so I thought, I know what I'll do. Charlie Mackesy. Anyone heard of Charlie Mackesy, a UK artist? Can hit the first one, Shandon. So Charlie Mackesy, he absolutely loves the story, and he's done a whole lot of art around it, a lot of paintings. And actually, where Sharon and I used to work, in our reception area, we commissioned one of his paintings, and I think it was like 6 foot by 4 or 5 foot, and like that, with the parable written behind it and this father's embrace, and you can see a son just falling into it. I thought, Charlie Mackesy, that's good. I thought, no, we can do better. We can do better. Shannon, why don't you just show one more? There's so that's Charlie Mackesy's, one of his bronzes. You can see the sun slouching. So one better than Charlie Mackesy. I've got it. Rembrandt. Cue next slide. Rembrandt's famous painting here, The Return of the Prodigal Son. And there is a Dutch pastor, Henry Nguyen, and he is absolutely obsessed with this painting, so much so that he once arranged for a personal viewing of the painting. So he flew over to St. Petersburg in Russia, and he spent the entire afternoon sat in front of this painting, and he watched as the light shifted and changed outside in the sky, and the painting was illuminated in different shades, and the painting came to life. Most amazing things. Cue next slide. For example, one of his observations, the hands, the one hand lower down on the son's back, slightly feminine, soft, comforting. The other hand, masculine, strong, bestowing sonship and authority. He then spent his whole life studying it. One other observation, a faint image of Jesus in the story. Not in the father, not in the elder son, shockingly in the younger son. Think about it, a young son leaving his father's home, well established, going to a foreign land, getting rid of everything he has, and at some point making his way back to the father. And we know Jesus clothed himself in our shame. I thought, this is good, but maybe some of you have heard it. I've heard that before. Come on, there's got to be more. So option 4, I thought, well, what if I expanded this Middle Eastern concept? And then it struck me, 3 words: robe, ring, sandals. Robe, ring, sandals. 3 words, 3 gifts about who this boy was still to his dad. So the robe, the robe clothed over the boy, covering him, covering his shame. Justified is a word I've heard before. Justified, just as if it had never happened, completely covering him. The ring. How many signet rings have we got here? In what family crests? We've got a few of them. A signet ring. In the old days, what was that? That was a power of attorney. For you youngsters, it was dad's credit card. It was full authority to do what you want. So we've got the robe, the ring, and then the sandals. So we've heard sandals. In those days, slaves barefoot, sons wore shoes. But Tate did that, didn't he? Tate did that a few weeks ago. Our flip-flop wearing Tate. Bible verse. All right, so option 5. And option 5. Now I thought, now I've got a stroke of genius. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to completely rewrite the story. I'm going to bring it from the Middle East 2,000 years ago right to almost today. I know. So 1912, Paris. A fashion house, renowned. A mother, 2 daughters. One daughter COO, one daughter a beautiful model, the face of the house, the younger daughter. She says, I've had enough, I want to make my own way. Takes not only part of inheritance, but she takes the prized head designer. Guess what his name was? Jean-Pierre. Takes Jean-Pierre, heads off to Berlin. Berlin 1914. Berlin 1914, war breaks out. She plummets overnight from success to failure. And the mother, desperate for the well-being, sends someone in a clandestine operation to rescue her and brings her back. So I thought, this is good stuff. I'm going to run it past Victoria. So Saturday nights, I'm sitting with V. Right, V. So, and I'm halfway through the story, and I look across, and Victoria's eyes are glazing over. Like, she's bored. I'm not even halfway through this great epic, and she's bored. And I said, look, do you not understand what's going on here? Do you not understand the story? She looks at me and says, yeah, of course I do. But Jesus already told the story. Like, why don't you just tell his version? And then it struck me. If I'm trying to outdo Jesus in a storytelling competition, I'm on a hiding second to none. So scrap that idea. So here I am, and I'm busy building my ladder. And we can probably stop there because I think everyone's getting the point. I realize I don't think I'm ever going to get to where I'm trying to get to. My words are just not doing this story justice. And then I started to get uncomfortable because I realized that not only were my words not good enough for the story, I realized that I was over-familiar with the story, that familiarity breeds contempt. Well, I'm going to tell you something else. Familiarity breeds something far more dangerous. With a story like this, familiarity breeds the illusion of understanding. That you actually know what this story is all about. And I'm going to present to you this idea. A story like this that you have literally heard, maybe some of you literally 100 times. You've stopped actually hearing it. We have become overly familiar with a God that we don't even know. Overly familiar with a God that we don't even know. So I'm going to ask you for the next 30 odd minutes to press into a story you've heard so many times. I'm going to pray in something here that I'm going to leave with you, that God is going to speak into not only your heads but into your hearts to reveal what it is he wants to reveal through the story. So, Tegan, you've been great. Thank you. But you know, don't even. So Jesus was the storyteller. This was his story to tell. So I thought, let me just look at it from his perspective. So there he is. And Luke chapter 15 opens with the scene. And Jesus has an audience with him. The audience is in two parts. On one side, you've got tax collectors and sinners, the outcasts of society. But they were pressing in. They wanted to hear what this extraordinary man had to say. It's quite uncomfortable there. Proximity. They were pressing in. They wanted to hear what he had to say. On the other side, you had the Pharisees. You had the religious teachers of the law, the religious elite, the upper crust, wealthy, well-to-do. And they were devoted. They were respected. They weren't pressing in. They were muttering. This man, he mingles with sinners. Worse, he even eats with them. They were muttering. Now, Jesus didn't get into an argument with them on their muttering. Instead, he decided to tell them a story. Now, as a Westerner, when we hear the story, you open your Bibles, Luke 15, and you look for the story of the prodigal son. And it's quite helpful because, of course, there you've got some nice little headings. And you look through and then you find it at the back of three little stories. There it is, the parable of the lost son. Neat and tidy. Separate stories, each have their own heading, these little three stories. The lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. Only here's the problem. When Jesus told the story, there were no headings for the story. Yeah? There were no chapters. There were no verses. In fact, when this book was written, there weren't any chapters and verses. So a quick history lesson. The chapters, they only came in 1200 around. And it was one of the archbishops of Canterbury, Stephen Langdon. The verse numbers, those only came 300 years later. So I'm going to present to you that these chapters, these verse numbers, these headings, these are great for finding your place in the Bible. They are absolutely disastrous when it comes to understanding this story. Right? These arguably three looking stories, they are not three stories. That's what you see as a Westerner. That's what you've always seen, maybe all of you. Three stories. That is not what Jesus was doing. That's what Jesus was doing. It is one story. One story. Lost sheep, lost coin, lost son. So the question is, what was Jesus doing? Now, I hate losing things. I think I've mentioned this, probably features quite often in all my talks. I hate losing things. All right, think Lego pieces. I do not know how JP is still sane in his house. Lego pieces, I hate losing them. Puzzle pieces, I hate losing puzzle pieces. Car keys, glasses, erasers, kitchen scissors. Please, one day would a pair of my kitchen scissors be in a drawer in my kitchen. I hate losing things. All right. The overarching question, though, that builds in the story is this. What does God do when he loses something important to him? Something precious to him? What does God do? Why the three parts to the story? And I'm going to do this quickly, so just pay attention here to this. The three stories. The lost sheep. Yeah? A shepherd has 100 sheep. He loses one, he leaves the 99, he goes and finds the one, he brings it back, he throws a party, let's celebrate. Our tax collectors and our sinners in the crowd, they would have heard that story and they would have known, that's me. I'm the lost one. Now, sheep are not the most intelligent animals in the world, but I've got to figure that somewhere in those little woolly minds of theirs, they wander off, and at some point they realize there's no other sheep around, and they realize they're lost. Those tax collectors, there was self-awareness with them. Self-awareness in being lost when you're a sinner and you know it. They knew it. So let's move to the next story, the lost coin. A woman has 10 coins. She loses one. She searches every corner of the house. She finds the coin and she throws a party. And now here's where it gets interesting. Because a coin, I'm convinced of this, a coin has absolutely no self-awareness. Okay, a coin does not know it is lost. It is an inanimate object. So when this coin, that was a terrible throw. We're going to pretend that just went straight underneath the middle. That coin can remain there for minutes, hours, days. It's not silver, so I know no one's going to grab it. 50p, not going to change your life. That coin is going to stay there, completely unaware of its own condition. Right? The Pharisees, had they been paying attention, they would have felt the ground start to shake under their feet. Why? Why? Because Jesus is describing people who are lost and they don't even know it. And then we get to the third part of the story, the lost son. And it's if Jesus now leans into them and says, right, let me make this unmistakable. A father has two sons. A father has two sons. No elaborate intro to the story, just a father and two sons. Jesus is giving you nowhere to hide. Two choices. Two sons. And now 2,000 years later, in a different culture, a different setting, that same question is ringing out. Which one am I? The youngest son, who knew he was lost and he hit rock bottom in a pigsty in a foreign land, or that oldest son who never left, who did everything right, who stood with the Father in his presence his whole life. And he was completely, utterly, and dangerously unaware of how lost he was. In these three parts to the story, something struck me as quite interesting. There's a lot of numbers in the story. I thought, let's just have a look at these numbers. So, first part of the story, 1 sheep in 100 percentage. The coin, 1 coin out of 10 percentage. 1 family, 2 sons, both of them lost. Percentage? 100%. 100%. But there's something else, the value. 1 sheep, valuable, tasty, but replaceable. 1 coin, a silver coin, a day's wages. You would tear the house apart to find it. 2 sons, irreplaceable. 2 sons, might as well have been 2 daughters, irreplaceable, immeasurable value. You see, Jesus is not telling 3 stories. It is 1 story, and he is cranking up the volume. 1%, 10%, 100%. By the time he comes to the end, everything is at stake here. All right? So those are the stories in numbers. But I thought, what's the heart of the story? Let's get to the heart of the story. And in there, in the heart of the story, there is a phrase. And I know it's important, and you know it's important because Jesus mentioned that same phrase twice. It's there in the middle of the story, and it's right there at the end of the story. And that is like a teacher going up to the whiteboard, writing a phrase down, underlining it, and then underlining it again. This is the point. This phrase I need you to know. So what is the phrase? He was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Now in Hebrew literary tradition, it's got a name, and that they call inclusio. Sounds like a Harry Potter word. It isn't. Inclusio is a literary device, and you see it all over the Psalms. You see exact phrases used multiple times, and they ring-fence things and sandwich them, often at the start, at the end, sometimes in the middle, repeated multiple times. Okay, the other week, let me first suggest this to you. Whenever you see that, take note. Right? When Brooke last spoke, she said there's something else in the Bible. Does anyone remember it? If you ever see these 2 words in a Bible, take note. Does anyone remember what they are? You see a word in a Bible. Charles Tate. It's embarrassing if he doesn't know. But Jesus or but God. You're reading your Bible and you see something but. The story isn't over. The story isn't ended. People do not know what's coming. But I'm going to suggest to you here, Jesus is saying to you, this phrase is the whole point of this story in 3 parts. He was dead. But here's the thing. Was the young son actually dead? No, Vaughan, he was not dead. He left the father's house in his own 2 feet. He went to a foreign land. He came to his senses, and he walked back to the father on his own 2 feet. The young son was not dead. But let's look at it from the Pharisees' point of view. From the Pharisees' perspective, the young son, he should have been dead. Why? Because sin creates a debt. Dishonor demands a reckoning, and blood is the only currency that could cover that type of shame and dishonor. And if you have a look at your Bibles, saying that sounds a bit dramatic. Well, Deuteronomy 21. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son, what do you think the Bible says you should do to him? Stone him. I don't even need to finish the passage. It's literally here in the Bible. You go to the elders of the village, you bring the son, you tell them what they've done, they pick up stones and they stone him. The Pharisees were thinking that young son, he is dead, should be dead. In our village, he would be dead. So, they seem enraged, but I'm going to share something with you to see how they're even more enraged than you might understand, because there is another phrase in the story, and it's hidden in here. So remember I said the young son, he comes to his senses and gets on his feet and he starts the journey back home. And he starts rehearsing his speech. Rehearses the speech. What am I going to say to Dad when I get home? What am I going to say? And he comes up with this elaborate, beautiful speech that in Western ears think, how beautiful. Beautifully crafted wordsmith answer, this repentant young son coming to his senses. This was the phrase, I've sinned against heaven and against you. Now, when the Pharisees heard that phrase, it would have detonated in their ears, because has anyone heard that phrase before in the Bible? Plagues, Egypt. Plagues, Egypt. The most powerful man in the world at that time. Moses is in front of him. Multiple plagues have come, and this man says, This time I have sinned. The Lord is righteous, and I and my people are in the wrong. And then his heart is hardened again. And another plague of locusts. What does he say? I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. And then again his heart becomes hard. The Pharisees knew the Pharaoh was never really sorry. And Jesus is using those exact same words. He is saying to you, and it lands like a thunderclap in that audience. Jesus is telling the audience, that young son, he's not sorry. He is simply saving his own skin. And what does that mean? It means the father's response is even more ridiculous, more shocking, and it outrages the Pharisees. This son should be dead. The scales do not balance. This story does not make sense. That's what the Pharisees are thinking. Now, if you look at that word, this phrase, the dead and alive, quite interesting in the Greek that the word for dead is nekros, and it isn't a soft word. It literally means physical death. And the word for alive again, that is anazeo, and it carries this prefix in it, the ana. And ana is back up and return. And it's not recovery language. This is resurrection language. What Jesus is doing, he is slipping in Easter language into EastEnders. He's slipping in this resurrection language into a story of a family drama, dead and alive. And the Pharisees were not wrong to be troubled, because in the story, where is the sacrifice? Where's the sacrifice? Where's the atonement? Where is the price paid for the conduct of that young son? The father simply runs, embraces him, and then there's a party. And the Pharisees are standing there lined. This doesn't work. Someone has to pay. And they're right. Now, storytelling has been integral to who we are as humans. You saw how Jesus used it. You saw it throughout biblical times. And they used it for remembering, for telling history. But they also used it for entertainment. And if we look through the centuries, you can look here in the medieval Europe, there were minstrels and jesters, and they would add stories with a bit of humor and excitement, stories, entertainment. And then, did anyone see the Tom Hanks movie? There was a Tom Hanks movie, News of the World. And he was it was set in Texas. Texan, you'll enjoy it. You've not seen the movie? No? Okay, good. Stick it on your Netflix list. Tom Hanks, he is Captain Jefferson Kidd. And he's post the Civil War, it's in the 1870s, and he goes from town to town with his newspaper telling stories of what's gone on, not only locally but far-flung in the world, and people pay him for that. And where we've moved from that, storytelling the Bible, to what Tom Hanks featured in, the power of imagery and cinema. And when it comes to cinema and movies, there is someone that Victoria and I really enjoy. And he's not an actor, he is a storyteller, a director. His name is Christopher Nolan. Heard of Christopher Nolan? Christopher Nolan, he's done many movies that I run through, and I bet you've seen some of them. One of the movies Victoria actually studied at university called Memento. Right? Christopher Nolan, he has made a celebrated career out of a very specific storytelling device. Right? What he does, and he did it in the movie that V studied, Memento, he's done it in Interstellar, he's done it in Dunkirk, he's done it in countless movies, Inception, Tenet. He basically takes a time frame, he splices it up, and he moves it around. Right? He disorientates you deliberately. He shows you the end of the story first. And then as you're watching the events unfold, you're slightly confused and you're trying to piece it together. And at some point in the story, some point in the movie, it shifts and you realize the resolution was always there. It was always there, you just hadn't seen it. Right. Now, as brilliant as he is, Christopher Nolan didn't invent that advice. He was copying and drawing from the greatest storyteller that ever lived. You see, in this story, Jesus is telling the ending first. The Father running, the Father's embrace, the party. And the audience is there thinking, how does this story work? Something is missing. It does not make sense. And you would be forgiven for thinking that. Because as I said, we looked at the Bible and how it was set up. And for the most part, I think translators did an amazing job. I love, it's Peterson, the Message version. And I think he spent so many hours on his knees praying about how he could translate the Bible into words that we could understand today, that would resonate today with us. And however, there's one thing that I'm not going to agree with the translators, and it is this. And the analogy is in the Olympic Games, there's one event that I love watching because you know it may well bring such drama. The 4x100 meter relay. Because you know they've practiced this over and over and over again, but you know either someone's going to false start or they're going to step out of a lane, or that little patch that you've got to run in and transfer the baton, they're going to cross it, or as they pass that baton, they're going to fumble and the baton is going to fall. I'm going to present to you today that when this book was translated and they were writing the headings, not only did they fumble when they broke the story into 3 parts, they fumbled when they named the story. This story should never have been called the lost son. It should never have been called the prodigal son, which was actually called. You see, the central story, figure in the story, it is not the son. Yeah, the central figure is the father. The prodigal father. Because what does prodigal mean? Prodigal is recklessly extravagant, wastefully lavish. And while the son, the young son, while he is prodigal with his inheritance, with his money, the father is prodigal with his love. The reckless, the never-ending, reckless love of God. We sang it earlier. The never-ending, reckless, titanic, oceanic, insane, obsessive love that God has for us. So, this father, the father has been watching, he's been waiting. He's been watching, he's been waiting. And then one day, off in the distance, he sees this faint image. And the image gets a little bit bigger, and at some point, something in his heart rises, and he just knows that's his son. He recognizes his son, and when he's still a long way off, the father starts running. The shame, the disgrace, the father couldn't care less. He runs even faster. And he reaches his son, he gets close to his son, and his arms start opening. And I need you to press in here, because there's an image here I need you to see. And there's a clue in this part of the story as to what's going on. A split-second image. And this is the thing. If you're not paying attention, you will miss it. If you're paying attention to the wrong character, you will miss it. If you are looking at the son at this part in the story, you will miss what is happening. What does the father do with his arms as he gets closer? These arms start widening. Does this image remind you of anyone else? Anything else? Paul writes in Ephesians, "For he chose us in him before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless in his sight." He chose us in Christ before the creation of the world to be holy and blameless, justified, just as if all the mess we'd ever done had never happened. All right. But it gets better. Revelations 13:8. The Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. The Father's arms were stretched wide because another set of arms were stretched wide in a moment of complete surrender, in a moment of complete love. And those arms were nailed open for you. The cross was not God's reaction to human failure. It wasn't the reaction to a young son who had gone off. The cross was written into the fabric of creation before creation even began. But here's the thing I want you to see. When Jesus was telling the story, the cross hadn't happened. The cross hadn't happened when Jesus was telling the story. And in that audience, it wasn't only the tax collectors, the sinners, or the Pharisees, the religious elite. His disciples were there too. At that point, 3 times, Jesus had already said he must die. A prophet cannot die outside of Jerusalem. He said that in Luke 13. But they don't get it. All of them, they had no idea what was coming. Jesus telling the story of a father who runs, embraces, and restores as if the debt is already settled. Because it was. In God's story, it was. And John Stott, he wrote this. When you look at the cross, what you should hear is this. You should hear Jesus whispering, I am here because of you. It is your sin I am bearing. Your curse I am suffering. Your debt I am paying. Your death I am dying. Only I don't think Jesus is pointing a finger. Because I'd like to expand it, because I would argue if you pressed in just a little bit further, you would hear Jesus saying, I did it willingly for you, because I am, and because I love you. He was dead and is alive. He was lost and is found. You were dead and you're alive. You were lost and you are found. One story. Your story, my story, God's story.